says you have to operate. And besides this, we have the Food and Drug Administration that prohibits the drug he should be prescribing, even though it's widely used in Europe. And he's got the IRS, which might not allow the patient a tax deduction for it anyhow. And he thinks, well, maybe I'll go to a specialist, but he can't because this is a Medicare patient. And the latest Medicare rules prohibit a consultation with this diagnosis because it's just too expensive to have our old folks diagnosed through the help of a specialist. And then doctor thinks, maybe I shouldn't even take this patient. After all, he's so sick, he's going to cost the hospital a lot of money. And some doctors are now manipulating their slates of patients. Yes, they're accepting only the healthiest patients, so their average costs are coming in lower. And the doctors who spend to try to help the patients start to look bad in the eyes of the hospital administrators, and they're afraid they're going to be kicked out and lose their staff privileges. Now, that gives you just the tip of the iceberg. Just the tip of the iceberg. Now, I'd like to ask you, would you like your case to be treated this way? By a doctor who takes into account your medical needs and the contradictory, unintelligible demands of how many different state and federal government agencies do you think right now, how many right now are out there issuing injunctions, orders, rules, laws? You got to do this, you can't do this, you must have this piece of equipment, it's prohibited to have this piece of equipment. How many? Well, at the time I did this several years ago, there were 90 different state and federal government agencies issuing a continuous torrent of rules governing every conceivable case. If you were a doctor, could you comply with all of it? Could you plan or work around or deal with the unknowable? But how could you not? Those agencies and their equivalents in the HMOs, which have been nurtured and brought into existence by government, and the insurance companies, which do the same thing and are also completely regulated by the government, all those agencies are real, and they are rapidly gaining total power over you, the doctor, and your mind and your patients. Now, this is a nightmare world. If it takes hold fully, what would you do as a doctor when you have to treat a case? There's no use thinking. You've got a gun pointing you in this direction. You're going to lose such and such privilege if you do this to the patient. And a gun pointing, if you do that, you're finished. And a gun pointing, that's prohibited. And a gun pointing, that's outlawed. And a gun pointing saying, we expect so-and-so. In that kind of society, nobody can decide by rational means what to do. And you've got a complicated case where there's an issue of judgment, where if you do something that isn't the routine and the obvious, you might save the patient's life. You might make a mistake and then be exposed to all the boards and the bureaucrats and the insurance companies that are there ready to pick you off. So what is your choice as a doctor? Well, you either just obey the loudest authority and you become a mindless nobody. You know, the post office type of doctor. The doctor today, the young ones who are just like postal clerks. They just do what they're told. They don't think. They have no problems. They just cover their rear ends, and that's it. You want that kind of a doctor? Or you try to sneak by unnoticed, bootlegging some good health care occasionally. And that's very unsatisfying and very unsafe because you could get caught. Or, as so many of the best doctors are doing right now, you do the obvious thing, and they're doing it in droves, my friends. They simply give up and quit the field. They leave it in droves. Now, I tell you that socialized medicine will finish off quality medicine in this country because it will finish off the medical profession. It will deliver the doctors bound hands and feet to the mercies of the bureaucracy. Those doctors who care will not function. And do you want to be treated by the kind of doctor who doesn't care? That is the question you should think of when the Kennedy-Kassebaum bill and all the rest of the attempts to turn doctors into slaves become enacted in this country. Not only what rights do the doctors have, that's the crucial question morally, but what is it going to do to you, the patient, once the doctor is no longer allowed by law to think? on line 8. Dr. Gary, welcome to the Leonard Peikoff Show.
Dr. Peikoff, you made some sage remarks. I'd like to throw 3 more things into the discussion real quick.
Go ahead, take your time.
One is, I understand your concept of government, but we need to get back to the insurance industry because, believe me, they are the ones that are in control. I'm a physician. Managed care is big bucks, big money. The CEOs make $20 million plus per year, and this really isn't government per se. We can discuss that in a second. The second point is this.
Okay.
You're probably aware of this, but high school educated people or less are making medical decisions. They're the ones who are receiving authorization from us to give somebody care, and they handle it. And all they have is a high school education.
What qualifies them? Let's stay on point 2 for a minute. What qualifies them? How do they get appointed to this?
Because they can, the insurance companies want to hire employees at the lowest salary that they can. In fact, in the future, another point will be it will not be doctors giving most of the service. It will be nurses or other
paramedics,
ancillary care. So we have many subjects here, but when a high school person, and they know nothing at all, many of them are almost illiterate when you speak to them, they make decisions for you and I and our families all the time, and I think that's unconscionable. I think Ayn Rand was correct in saying that the inferior people will never allow quality, superior people to really stay in power.
No.
This is what she was saying. I have read her, and it's coming true in that regard. The third point is, as I said, I don't think that doctors will be doing a lot of work. Right now, Blue Cross, for example, doesn't want doctors. They want nurses to take over and do as much as they can because they pay them far less.
And do you find that there's going to be a big trend toward government sponsorship of so-called alternative medicine, which is a lot cheaper? You could take, 1 drop from a homeopathic remedy?
Okay, very good point, but let's go on 2 tracks. We have government on one track controlling a lot, and we have really, honestly, capitalistic greed, if you will, on the other side, meaning the insurance companies controlling the game. Now,
I want to go to the insurance companies then, but I do not accept that the insurance companies are capitalistic, and I'll tell you what my definition of capitalism is in a second. But I just want to know whether you think that that these alternative medicines, some of them involve no instrumentation, no high technology, no round-the-clock care. So isn't that unnatural for government to start pushing that?
Doctor, of course. But that'll be true for both sides. And it'll always be the cheapest, the most inexpensive service that you can get by with. Now,
but it wasn't true in the old days of fee-for-service medicine. That was capitalism. But now what we have, the insurance industry is a completely controlled industry. Do you know what? There's no difference.
That's the point where you and I would spend some hours discussing that.
Is it not completely controlled by government? They set the rates, they set the terms, they say they've just passed a law saying who they have to accept, when they have to transfer programs. They're simply paper outfits doing what the government tells them they have to do. Isn't that true?
You're absolutely correct when it comes to government-funded insurance kind of programs, like what we call Medi-Cal and Medicaid and so forth. You're absolutely correct.
Yes, but that happens to be such a huge number, and HMOs, thanks to government, have taken such a great amount that the insurance industry as a whole has no place to go but to follow managed care.
Yes, but they can do it in the private sector, and they're doing it beautifully. If you were really on the front lines, you saw this, you would see. It's an autonomous program, Dr. Peikoff.
I really don't think it is. With all due respect to you, I think the insurance companies today are exactly like, department stores were under Adolf Hitler. They're private in name, but they're completely controlled by government. Government created the price problem that made managed care such a boom. Government created all the managed care outlets. They took over half of the hospital admissions in taking over Medicare, and the insurance industry is simply following the laws that the government is laying down. They would go out of business if they tried to institute fee-for-service in the face of what the government is doing.
Well, that is your thesis. I understand it. I respect your comments. I think you have a sage mind. But I think that many, many people could get their MBAs on that subject that you and I cannot do it in this short time. I take this stance still strongly as I've spoken to you. But you're correct on many, many fronts. I think the main front is, does the United States want to stay at a quality level in anything? I think that's what we're talking about. Ayn Rand talked about the talented and the people with quality. But don't you see, those people are under fire.
They are certainly under fire.
You don't see craftsmen anymore. You don't see people who are artisans. You don't see people, the artists, don't get by. We're all becoming McDonaldized.
I think it's true, and I think one of the main reasons for it is that people use if you know Ayn Rand, you'll know what I mean by the altruist ethics. They use the idea that the have-nots are superior to the haves in anything. So if you have talent, you are a sacrificial lamb.
You have to give.
You're there to serve the untalented. It's a complete reversal.
That's why Ayn Rand is powerful and influential. I read her, at a time of my life in the 30s, when it was the right time. And this is what artists are supposed to do. They're supposed to look forward. They're supposed to look forward. And unfortunately, some of the things that she's talked about are very, very real today. My problem is, and the question for you on the table in the future is, so what can be done? I don't see any way out of this trap. And it's not just medicine, don't you see?
No, of course.
Today's show is on medicine. But your whole thesis and your work has been in a lot of other areas, and I respect you for that. But this is the problem. The word quality is a subject unto itself, and that's why there's a famous book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance that a lot of people have read, that it's very influential. It's about the word quality. What is quality?
Well, I think we know what quality is, but we also know that there's tremendous resentment against quality, and I think that we have to start by fighting a moral battle against the whole trend of the world. And with that, Dr. Gary, I have to thank you for being on, but I have to go to my 3 o'clock identification.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sir.
We're going to pause here for station identification, and then we're going to be back with Bureaucrats versus Your Doctor's Brain. It's 3:02. My name is Leonard Peikoff. Our subject is Bureaucrats versus Your Doctor's Brain. To those of you who just joined us at 3 o'clock, I'd like to extend a special welcome to you. We've spent the last half hour talking about why, in my opinion, government takeover of medicine is going to have the effect of stopping, stunting, and paralyzing the mind of good doctors when they try to make medical decisions, because they're in the throes and under the thrall of dozens and dozens of different edicts from different medical control boards, state and local and federal, and insurance companies, which are nursed by the government and controlled by the government, HMOs, which couldn't only exist in the quantity they do thanks to government policies. All of these different agencies have put the doctor in a position where he doesn't dare think. The best doctors are quitting. And I say it really is Bureaucrats versus Your Doctor's Brain. And the last caller, before he had to hang up, said, what can be done about this? And I would just like to answer him before I go to some of the other callers who are waiting. Answer him briefly. I think the only thing that can be done beyond fighting the next step of it, which is the Kennedy-Kassebaum bill, I don't know much whether there's much choice of doing anything on that particular bill, but the only long-range hope is we have to have a philosophic revolution in this country, and above all, a moral revolution. The doctors lost the battle for freedom because they were afraid to assert a moral principle. I mean to assert their own personal individual rights, their right to their lives, their liberty, their property, their pursuit of happiness. They didn't have the courage to stand up and say the Declaration of Independence applies to the medical profession too. As soon as, the have-nots and the socialists and the big government advocates came out, starting with Lyndon Johnson in the 60s, and said the elderly and the poor need your services. You've got to serve. You've got to sacrifice. The doctors capitulated. That's in essence what happened. They said, who are we to stand up against the trend demanding our immolation? We've got to be, quote, moral. We've got to sacrifice. And the result was the government had a willing group to take over, a group of patsies, and they took them over. So the only hope against every socialist plan, I say, depends on the doctor speaking out against the plan not only on the practical grounds that it won't work, but first of all on moral grounds. The doctors have got to defend themselves and their own interest as a matter of justice, upholding a moral principle.